"Your son is up there." The little girl pointed towards the roof of the millionaire's mansion, a man who had lost his son. Then, when they opened the roof, they discovered something shocking. Rate my story from 0 to 10. Your opinion is very important. And subscribe to my channel to support my work. I'm counting on your help. The scream sliced through the muggy afternoon air in the historic town like a razor, echoing through the cobblestone streets at exactly 3 o'clock. The 52-year-old businessman nearly dropped his coffee cup as he turned away from the window of his luxurious apartment. It was always at the same time, always with the same desperate intensity. For 3 weeks straight, that sound had been coming from the Victorian house across the street, a faded yellow 2-story building with peeling blue window frames that clashed with the elegance of the modern building where he lived. As the owner of one of the largest construction companies in the area, he was used to solving complex problems, but he preferred to keep his distance from other people's dramas. Especially after 5 years of living alone, ever since he lost his wife on a rainy night, he preferred not to remember. Across the street, inside the Victorian house, the 4-year-old girl huddled in the corner of the kitchen, too young to understand why her aunt hated her so much. The 38-year-old woman firmly held a metal spoon she had heated on the gas stove, her eyes red from the alcohol, fixed on the child trembling before her. "You're a curse on this house," the aunt hissed. Her voice slurred from the booze she had been consuming since noon at the local dive bar. "Because of you, my sister is gone. Because of you, I lost everything." The spoon came down hard on the girl's small arm, leaving a red mark that would join the other scars that dotted her thin arms. The child bit her lip to keep from screaming louder. She had learned that screams only enraged her aunt more, who had worked at City Hall until she was fired for constant absences caused by her addiction. The girl closed her eyes and tried to remember her mother's soft voice, singing that lullaby before she went to sleep. It was all that was left of her now, fragments of memories and a melody that insisted on echoing in her mind during the most painful moments. "Stop whining," the aunt grunted, putting the spoon back in the drawer as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Go to your room, and I don't want to see you until tomorrow. And if you smear the walls again with that filthy charcoal, you'll see what real punishment is." The girl ran to the small room at the back of the house, a stifling space with an old bed and a crucifix on the wall. There, she curled up in the thin sheet and began to hum her mother's song softly, the only thing that still comforted her. She didn't know that across the street, someone had finally paid attention to that melody. The businessman stopped reviewing contracts when he heard the faint but distinct sound. He knew that song. His wife used to sing it when she cooked, a popular tune about free birds. He went back to the window, his eyes scanning the facade of the Victorian house. One of the back windows was slightly open, and from there came that child's voice, trembling but persistent. For the first time in 3 weeks, he felt something other than simple annoyance. There was something in that voice that touched a sensitive chord in his chest, something that reminded him of responsibilities long buried under layers of work and isolation. His fortune, built through smart investments in the stock market, had always brought him security, but now he realized that his wealth in dollars couldn't silence that echo of suffering. In the house next to the Victorian, the 61-year-old retired schoolteacher watered her begonias when she heard the girls singing. Unlike the businessman, she could no longer ignore the signs. During her 40 years teaching elementary school, she had developed a sixth sense for children in distress. How strange, she thought, watching the windows of the house. The woman had always been troubled, but since she had taken custody of her orphaned niece, something had changed in the air of that house. The girl never played in the yard, never ran through the streets like the other kids in the historic town. The teacher dried her hands on her apron and made a decision. The next morning, she would pay a courtesy visit to her neighbor. It had been a long time since she had properly talked to her, and maybe it was time to get to know the little girl better. The sun began to set over the mountains surrounding the town when the girl finally fell asleep, exhausted by pain and fear. Her little fingers clutched the sheet, and in her dreams she flew like the birds she secretly drew on the kitchen walls with pieces of charcoal found in the yard. Across the street, the businessman closed the curtains and tried to get back to work, but he couldn't concentrate. Something had changed that afternoon, something he didn't yet fully understand. For the first time in years, he felt that perhaps it was time to pay attention to what was happening beyond his own windows. The next morning brought with it the aroma of fresh bread from the local bakeries and the typical hustle and bustle of the historic town waking up for another day. The teacher put on her best floral dress and combed her grey hair with extra care. There was something in that child's voice that wouldn't leave her alone, an echo of hopelessness that she recognized from her years as an educator. At 9 o'clock sharp, she knocked on the door of the Victorian house. The sound echoed through the silent interior until shuffling footsteps approached. The aunt opened the door with a puffy face and red eyes, clearly suffering the effects of the previous night's drinking. "Good morning," said the teacher with her most gentle smile. "I've come to pay a courtesy visit. It's been so long since we've had a proper conversation." The aunt hesitated, running her hand through her disheveled hair. "Oh, it's not a good time. The house is a mess." "Nonsense, dear. We've been neighbors for so long." The teacher took a step forward, forcing the aunt to step back. "And I would love to meet your niece. I've heard she's a lovely girl." The aunt's face hardened for an instant before forcing a weak smile. She's sick. High fever. Best not to get close." At that moment, a soft noise came from the kitchen, the sound of something being dragged on the floor. The teacher pricked up her ears, immediately recognizing the sound of a child trying to move silently. "Maybe I can help," the teacher insisted. "I have experience with sick children. I raised 3 kids. You know how it is." "No need, really," the aunt replied quickly, blocking the entrance with her body. "I already took her to the doctor. It's just a cold. It'll pass soon." The teacher noticed the woman's nervous hands, the way she avoided eye contact, and especially the strong smell of alcohol that emanated from her, even though it was so early. All the signs she had learned to recognize during decades of dealing with troubled families. Across the street, the businessman watched the scene from his window while he ate breakfast. He had woken up earlier than usual, disturbed by confused dreams, where a child's voice mixed with memories of his former employee. When he saw the teacher at the door of the Victorian house, a strange curiosity overcame him. The teacher finally said goodbye to the aunt, but not before casting an inquisitive look inside the house. There was something deeply wrong there, and her experience told her that a child was suffering. Inside the Victorian house, the aunt slammed the door shut and went to the kitchen, where she found the girl crouching behind the table, trying to hide. The child had tried to reach a glass of water from the sink, but her height didn't allow it, and she had knocked over a chair in the process. "Didn't I tell you to stay in your room?" the aunt snarled, her irritation intensified by the hangover and the unexpected visit. "I was thirsty, aunt," the girl mumbled, her big eyes fixed on the floor. "Thirsty?" The aunt laughed bitterly. "You want water? Then go get it in the yard. And since you like to make so much noise, you can stay out there until I decide you can come in." The girl went out to the small backyard, a space surrounded by high walls and dominated by a single apple tree. There, she sat on the dirt and began to draw with a piece of charcoal she had found near the gas stove. They were always birds, small, large, some flying, others perched on imaginary branches. The hours passed slowly. The aunt had locked the back door, leaving the girl in the yard under the hot midday sun. The child began to feel dizzy, but she knew that knocking on the door would only result in more punishment. So she began to sing her mother's song softly. the melody being her only source of comfort. It was this melody that reached the businessman's ears again. This time, he couldn't ignore it. There was something too familiar about that voice, that specific song. He picked up his cell phone and, almost without thinking, began to record. He didn't know exactly why, but an instinct told him that he might need that evidence. As he recorded, fragments of memories began to fit together in his mind. His former employee used to hum that same song while she worked. The woman who had been an exemplary employee until she disappeared abruptly. The woman who always spoke fondly about her little girl, a girl named her daughter, the businessman murmured, his cell phone trembling in his hands. The child suffering in the house across the street was the daughter of his former employee, the gentle woman who had worked for him for 3 years before simply disappearing. The realization hit him like a punch to the stomach. How hadn't he made this connection before? He vaguely remembered the employee mentioning family problems, a sister she didn't get along with, financial difficulties. But he was so absorbed in his own problems at the time, the growing conflicts with his wife, the problems in the company, that he hadn't paid due attention. Now, 5 years later, his ex-employee's daughter was across the street, and from the sounds coming from that house, she wasn't in a good situation. The guilt he carried for the loss of his wife multiplied, now including the regret for not having helped when she clearly needed it. At 3 o'clock punctually, the screams started again. This time, the businessman didn't turn away from the window. He watched with growing horror as through the kitchen window of the Victorian house he saw a female silhouette moving aggressively. He picked up his cell phone again and began to record, this time with more determination. What he saw through the cell phone screen made him nauseous. The aunt was holding something in her hands, it seemed to be a kitchen utensil, and gesturing violently towards a small figure he could barely distinguish. The girl's screams echoed through the afternoon, and this time the businessman couldn't pretend they were just childish tantrums. When the silence returned, he remained at the window for a few more minutes, his heart pounding in his chest. He had just witnessed something that would change everything. His investments in bitcoins and his wealth accumulated over the years seemed insignificant in the face of that brutal reality happening just a few feet away. That night, the girl slept on the floor of the backyard, where the aunt had left her as punishment for making too much noise during the afternoon. The child curled up in her own t-shirt and looked at the stars through the branches of the apple tree. In her 4-year-old mind, she made a silent wish to her mother, wherever she was, that someone, anyone, would take her out of that place of pain. Across the street, the businessman couldn't sleep, tormented by the certainty that he needed to act, but paralyzed by the same emotional inertia that had consumed him since his wife's departure. His wealth built through smart investments and generous dividends was useless if he couldn't protect a child who clearly needed help. 3 days had passed since the businessman discovered the child's identity, and guilt consumed him like a slow fire. During these days, he had systematically documented the episodes of violence, always at 3 o'clock, always with the same methodical brutality. His collection of videos and audios grew, but his courage to act remained paralyzed by the same cowardice that had haunted him since the night he lost his wife. On that Thursday morning, the teacher made a decision that would change the course of everything. She had spent the night awake, tormented by the certainty that a child was suffering just a few feet from her house. Her 4 decades as an educator had taught her to recognize the signs, and they were all present in the Victorian house. She decided to approach the situation differently. Instead of attempting another direct visit to the aunt, she opted for a more subtle strategy. At 7 in the morning, she positioned herself in the side yard of her house, the place from which she had the best view of the backyard of the Victorian house. What she saw horrified her. The girl was sitting under the apple tree, completely alone, wearing only a torn t-shirt and panties. Her small arms were marked by obvious burns, some still red and inflamed. The child was drawing in the dirt with a piece of charcoal, creating shapes that the teacher recognized as birds. "My God," whispered the teacher, her hands trembling as she held the fence that separated the yards. It was worse than she imagined. Much worse. The girl looked up and saw the lady watching her. For a moment, the two stared at each other in silence. Then, to the teacher's surprise, the child smiled, a weak but genuine smile, and waved shyly. "Hi, Grandma," said the girl in her tiny voice, using the affectionate term she gave to all elderly ladies. "Hi, honey," replied the teacher, struggling to keep her voice steady. "Are you okay?" The girl glanced quickly at the windows of the house before answering. "Yes, I am. I'm just drawing birdies." "That's nice. Do you like birds?" "I like them a lot. They can fly wherever they want," replied the child, her big eyes shining with a sadness that broke the teacher's heart. At that moment, the aunt's harsh voice echoed from inside the house. "Girl, where are you?" The terror that instantly took over the child's face said everything the teacher needed to know. The girl quickly got up, wiped her hands on her t-shirt, and ran inside the house, but not before looking back at the teacher with an expression that screamed for help. The teacher remained in the yard for a few more minutes, processing what she had seen, the burns, the fear, the way the child reacted to her aunt's voice. Everything confirmed her worst fears. She could no longer pretend she didn't know what was happening. Meanwhile, across the street, the businessman had witnessed the entire interaction. Through his window, he could partially see the backyard, and the sight of the marks on the girl's arms made him sick. For the first time in 5 years, he felt a genuine fury burning in his chest. His former employee had trusted him in some way. Even if indirectly, even if he didn't know it at the time, she had left her daughter in the care of a family who lived in the same town where he lived, and now that child was being tortured while he watched from his comfortable window, paralyzed by his own cowardice. At 11 in the morning, the teacher made a courageous decision. She put on her best Sunday dress, grabbed a tray of homemade cookies she had prepared as a pretext, and went to the Victorian house again. This time, she wouldn't take no for an answer. The aunt answered the door reluctantly, clearly annoyed by her neighbor's persistence. "Mrs., I already told you it's not a good time." "Honey, I brought some cookies I made yesterday," the teacher interrupted firmly, "and I insist on getting to know the little one better. As long-time neighbors, it's our duty to support each other." Before the aunt could protest, the teacher had already entered the house, using all the authority that decades of classroom experience had given her. The interior of the Victorian house was dark and smelled of mildew mixed with alcohol. Old and poorly maintained furniture occupied the living room, and there was a heavy atmosphere that made the air seem difficult to breathe. "The girl is sleeping," the aunt lied, blocking the path to the back of the house. "That's a shame. Maybe another time then," said the teacher. But her experienced eyes had already catalogued several disturbing details. Dark stains on the kitchen floor that seemed to have been poorly cleaned, a metal spoon left on the gas stove, and mainly small charcoal drawings on the walls that had clearly been made by a child. At that moment, a low sound came from the direction of the kitchen, a muffled sob, almost imperceptible. The teacher and the aunt froze. The silence that followed was tense and revealing. "It must be the neighbor's cat," the aunt said quickly, but her voice trembled slightly. The teacher smiled and nodded, but she had decided she had seen enough. "Well, I'll let you rest then. But remember that I'm always next door if you need anything." "Anything at all." The teacher's tone made it clear that it wasn't just a casual offer of help. It was a subtle but direct warning. After the teacher left, the aunt slammed the door shut and went to the kitchen, where she found the girl huddled behind the gas stove trying to hide. The child had cried when she heard the teacher's gentle voice, remembering the kindness she had once known. "You were making noise," accused the aunt, her eyes already shining with the familiar fury. "No, Aunt, I didn't make noise," protested the girl, but her small voice sounded weak even to her. The aunt picked up the metal spoon that was on the stove and put it directly in the flame. The girl recognized the ritual and began to tremble. She knew what was coming next. "You want to attract attention, don't you?" the aunt hissed as the spoon heated up. "You want the neighbors to come here asking questions? You think I don't know how to take care of you?" Across the street, the businessman had positioned his cell phone at the window and was recording again. This time, he managed to capture not only the sounds, but also partial images through the kitchen window. What he saw made him make a decision that would change everything. He could no longer be just a silent observer. His former employee had been a good person, a dedicated woman who always spoke of her daughter with love. That child was his responsibility now, whether he wanted it or not. His diversified assets and his robust cash flow meant nothing if he couldn't protect an innocent life. While the girl suffered another episode of systematic torture, the businessman made a call that he hadn't made in months. He called his personal lawyer and old college friend. "Robert, I need your help with a delicate situation," he said, watching through the window as the child's screams echoed through the afternoon. "It's about a child, and I think it might be a matter of life." That night, after the aunt fell asleep drunk on the living room couch, the girl managed to slip silently into the backyard. Her new burns stung, but the physical pain was less than the pain in her heart. She sat under the apple tree and looked at the stars, humming her mother's song softly. What she didn't know was that for the first time in months, someone was truly paying attention to her suffering. And that, in the coming days, her life would change in ways she couldn't even imagine. Across the street, the businessman had finally found the courage to act, but he still didn't know that he would discover much more than just a child in danger. He would discover a connection that would change his life forever. The lawyer arrived at the businessman's apartment on Friday morning with a serious expression on his face. The two men had been classmates in college almost 3 decades ago, and Robert knew well the emotional isolation that his friend had built after the loss of his wife. That's why the urgent phone call the night before had surprised him so much. "I need you to tell me exactly what's going on," said Robert, sitting down in the spacious living room of the apartment. "You talked about a child in danger, but I need details." The businessman poured coffee and stood near the window, the place that had become his obsession in recent days. "The girl who lives in the house across the street is the daughter of a former employee of mine. She's being mistreated by the aunt who's taking care of her." "Mistreated how?" asked Robert, taking a notepad out of his briefcase. "Burns, daily screams, neglect." The businessman paused, struggling with the words. "I have recordings, evidence of what's happening." Robert was silent for a moment, processing the information. "This is very serious. If you have evidence of child abuse, you need to contact Child Protective Services immediately." "I know," replied the businessman, running his hands over his face, "but there's something else. The child's mother worked for me for 3 years. She left abruptly in 2019, a few months before the accident with my wife. I never understood why, but now you feel responsible," Robert completed, understanding the emotional complexity of the situation. The businessman nodded. "If I had paid more attention at the time, maybe I could have helped. Maybe she wouldn't have had to leave her daughter with this woman." At that moment, the familiar sound of screams echoed from the house across the street, even though it was only 9 in the morning. Both men turned to the window, and Robert could see the expression of anguish on his friend's face. "This happens every day?" he asked, horrified. "At 3 in the afternoon religiously, but sometimes at other times too," replied the businessman, picking up his cell phone. "Want to see the recordings?" Robert watched the videos in growing silence, his face paling with each scene. As a lawyer specializing in family law, he had seen many cases of child abuse, but something about the systematization of that violence disturbed him deeply. "We can't wait any longer. I need you to give me all these recordings today. I'm going to contact Child Protective Services and the District Attorney's office. That child needs to be removed from that house immediately." While the two men planned the intervention, across the street, the girl lived another day of terror. The aunt had woken up with a particularly severe hangover and discovered that there was no more alcohol in the house. Her irritation multiplied when she found new drawings of birds that the child had made on the kitchen wall during the night. "How many times do I have to tell you not to smear the walls?" screamed the aunt, grabbing the girl's arm hard enough to leave marks. "You're a plague, a curse on this house." The girl tried to explain, to say that she had dreamed of her mother and that the drawings made her feel less alone, but the words were lost in sobs. At 4 years old, she still didn't fully understand why her aunt hated her so much, why each day brought new pain. It was the teacher who first heard the more intense screams than usual when she passed by the house on her way to the grocery store. The teacher had spent the entire night thinking about the conversation with the girl in the yard, the marks she had seen on the child's arms, the atmosphere of fear that permeated that house. The teacher stopped in front of the gate and listened. This time, the sounds were different, more desperate, more prolonged. At that moment, she made a decision that would change everything. Instead of going to the grocery store, she went directly to downtown, where the small office of Child Protective Services was located. She knew the counselor, Anna, well, a former student of hers who had dedicated herself to protecting vulnerable children. "Anna, I need to talk to you about a very serious situation," said the teacher, entering the office without ceremony. Anna looked up from the papers she was reviewing. "Mrs., it's good to see you. What brings you here today?" "A child in danger, my neighbor. I'm sure she's being mistreated." Anna straightened up in her chair, her expression becoming immediately serious. During her 5 years as a Child Protective Services counselor, she had learned to recognize when a report was serious, and the teacher was not the type of person to make reckless accusations. "Tell me everything," said Anna, picking up a complaint form. While the teacher reported her observations across town, Robert was in a similar meeting at the district attorney's office. District Attorney Lucas listened attentively while Robert presented the evidence collected by the businessman. "This is compelling evidence," said the district attorney, examining the videos on Robert's cell phone. "I'm going to order an immediate investigation and request the removal of the child from the family environment." That's how, by an extraordinary coincidence, 2 simultaneous complaints reached Child Protective Services on the same morning. Anna was finishing writing down the teacher's report when her phone rang. "Anna, this is District Attorney Lucas. I need you to make an urgent intervention in a house in the downtown area. We have evidence of serious child abuse." Anna paused, her pen suspended over the paper. "Is it by any chance a yellow Victorian house?" "Exactly. How did you know?" "I just received a complaint about the same house," replied Anna, looking at the teacher with surprise. "2 independent sources. This confirms the severity of the situation." At 2 in the afternoon, a coordinated operation was being set up. Anna, accompanied by 2 social workers and a court officer, was heading to the Victorian house. The teacher had offered to accompany the team, using her experience with traumatized children. The businessman watched everything from his window, his heart pounding in his chest. Finally, after days of paralysis, he had managed to act. Robert was by his side, both witnessing the moment that would change the girl's life forever. "You did the right thing," said Robert, placing his hand on his friend's shoulder. "I hope it's not too late," replied the businessman, his eyes fixed on the team approaching the Victorian house. In the house, the aunt had gone out to buy alcohol, leaving the girl locked in the stifling room. The child kept singing softly, unaware that her life was about to change radically. When Anna knocked on the door of the Victorian house and got no answer, she used her legal authority to enter the property. What they found inside exceeded even their worst expectations. A dirty and poorly maintained house, a strong smell of alcohol, and obvious signs of neglect in all the rooms. It was the teacher who first heard the weak voice coming from the room at the back. "There's someone here," she said, guiding the team through the hallway. When they opened the door to the room and found the girl huddled in the corner, singing her sad song, everyone present felt a pang in their hearts. The child raised her big, scared eyes, not understanding who these people were or what they wanted from her. "Hi, honey," said Anna, crouching down to be at the child's height. "My name is Anna. We've come to help you." The girl looked at the teacher, recognizing the gentle lady who had talked to her in the yard. A glimmer of hope shone in her eyes, but it was quickly replaced by fear. "Aunt will be mad," she whispered. "You don't have to worry about that now," said the teacher, reaching out to the child. "We're going to get out of here, okay?" And so, after 8 months of silent suffering, the girl was finally removed from the house where she had known only pain and fear. But the biggest surprise was yet to come. Across the street, the businessman watched the scene with tears in his eyes. His fortune, built through smart investments and prosperous businesses, would finally have a real purpose: to give his former employee's daughter the life she deserved. He didn't yet know that this decision would lead him to discover that true love is worth much more than any wealth accumulated in funds or investments. The girl was finally safe, and a new family was about to be born from the union of hearts that learned to care again.